Good morning. It's Monday morning, and I got a fair amount of progress in my sketchbook yesterday on Sunday, but I also did a lot of reading, and I'd like to share that with you. I guess Sundays are just days that are good for cartooning and good for reading. Anyway, I'm still working on the book The Funnies, and I read the next chapter. So we have gone through about the 1910s or so. So in the first chapter, we saw the dawn of the newspaper comic, and we looked at Little Nemo as a good example of that. So in the 1910s or so, each chapter is about a decade, we have the creation of the daily comic strip. And something that's interesting about the daily comic strip is that it's not quite in the format that we have today. So we see vertical arrangements, we see panels that are not separated, they just have a line between them. Here we have George Harriman, who has a mini comic strip on the bottom, and this mini comic strip is, of course, Crazy Cat, who later becomes the star. Here is a 6-panel format. The word balloons often just have a little line instead of a tail, as we are more familiar with today. Another 6-panel format. Anyway, the black and white daily comic strip was an innovation, as was syndication at this time. So we've seen the invention of the color Sunday, and now we have the daily in black and white. And so the bare bones of comics are being created, and now they just have to grow in sophistication and in acceptance by mainstream America. Now, I also read the first chapter of this book, and this book is, I believe, from the 1980s, and this book is meant to be a guide to drawing gags for magazines, such as The New Yorker. Now, I find a good item to study also, because in my search to understand comics, I don't just want to be limited by comics in one form, but comics in all forms. So newspaper comics, web comics, American comic books, European comic books, manga, and newspaper gags. The first chapter was really just an introduction, and it was more of a story of how magazine gags really used to be sold, especially in the 1960s. And what I really got out of that chapter was that magazines were going out of business all the time, new ones were coming, the whole business was constantly changing. People always thought that comics were dying, and yet somehow they didn't. And the gag market was very volatile for forever. It always has been. And that just makes it, I think, worthy of study. I look forward to this book. I want to learn more about telling a whole story in a single panel. That's an important art. Anyway, we're almost done with the Smithsonian Book of Comic Book Comics, and we have come to Lulu, who was written and drawn by several people, starting with John Stanley. And little Lulu is, how to describe little Lulu? I think of it as, it's a lot like Nancy. But Nancy, but for the comic books. But of course Nancy was also in the comic books as well as in the newspapers. Let me just say, Lulu has a really great design. She has this unique hairstyle, which I'm not sure how to translate in real life. It's a little bit like Charlie Brown's. I'm not sure if those are how that's supposed to work. and she lives in this timeless era where she has adventures with her friends, sort of kind of a Tom Sawyer like adventures, but kind of in a timeless version of 1930s through 1950s America. Maybe it's a bit like Dennis the Menace, but sweeter, perhaps. Anyway, we see her in an adventure at the beach, and people's beach clothing get torn, and this life saver has to put on a dress because it's the only clothing around. Here we have basically a battle between boys and girls, where they're trying to fool each other, and Lulu gets revenge. It's pretty much Shakespearean revenge, like a Titus Andronicus, in a way, but without the cannibalism. She steals the clothing of the boys while they're skinny dipping, and the boys have to put on diapers because that's the only clothing she could find, and she humiliates them in front of the town. It's really that's actually kind of funny. I like these panels because she's hidden the boys in a wagon, and the town kids are like, "Ooh, what do you have in there?" And they see the feet, and he's like, "Oh no, she's got a wagon of feet." This is like Titus Andronicus. And then this is actually really these are some good panels here. This crowd scene where the boys are revealed and they're wearing diapers, and it's all humiliation. That's actually pretty funny. And we have some other adventures. One where she's telling a tall tale about a Richie Rich type character. And the father gets stuck in a tree. Okay, that's Little Lulu. The next, Carl Barks, who in some ways needs no introduction for his wonderful Donald Duck comics. This book has a Christmas example, and one thing I find interesting about this example, I'm not as familiar with Carl Barks as I would like to be, is look how interesting the panel arrangement is, because this could easily have been an 8-panel page, but here we have this winding river, the sort of like the winding Mississippi in Huckleberry Finn. We have garland, just as kind of a Christmas decoration. We have this circle. This adds a lot of energy. It's not quite; these are not quite like the panels in manga, or at least some types of manga. More decoration. Donald and Uncle Scrooge are up to their normal shenanigans. It involves a Christmas present, and they get in a fight with steam engines, and it's very very funny. I like that. And Santa Claus, who is essentially a superhero, he saves the day at the end. Here we have the wise men as just a decoration between the panels, and this juxtaposition. Something leaps from one panel to the next. That's really good. Nice little decoration, and blah blah blah. Santa saves the day. This was, I believe, in the 1940s, and I noticed that this one reindeer is definitely Donner instead of Donder, Donder, like in the poem. Donder, of course, being thunder, and he has become anglicized, I suppose, at some point. Alright, and then we get to Walt Kelly. I haven't finished this section, but I did want to point out that we can see here the difference between how the comic book was actually printed and then how we like to represent it today. And here we can see the original comic book was on an off-white pulp paper, and nowadays we've cleaned that up, made it completely white. We can see the colors are not quite as vibrant, and so these collections, and rightly so, are basically a platonic version of how these books should have appeared if they could have been printed on nicer paper and in a nicer means. Anyway, so we will look at these Pogo strips later, and we're actually almost done with the book. We just have The Spirit left and EC Comics. EC Comics, of course, with Bill Gaines and Mad Magazine. Anyway, in terms of my art progress, I'm still working on this Alien St. Patrick's Day Parade. So we have, I wanted to draw dancing girls, but these girls are aliens, so they're dancing around. She's just a kind of a squiggle there. And for this page, I wanted to do a couple things. I knew we were going to have an alien circus around, so I wanted to introduce that in a corner of the page. And I also wanted to draw sort of a downtown image, and this is just sort of a generic downtown, but sort of a generic alien downtown. So many downtowns have gridiron buildings. We're familiar with that in New York City. So I did sort of gridiron designs. But a normal gridiron is because the roads go that way. But for this alien city, they just have gridiron buildings. For, alien reasons. And now we have the beginnings of an alien circus. So there's an elephant with two trunks. And I believe there's a scene in Dumbo where we see hippopotami pulling a organ. So I wanted to draw that in sort of a similar pose. This hippopotamus, you can barely see, has 6 legs, 3 on each side, because he's an alien hippopotamus. And I just wrote out the word space circus because, it's a space circus. And I wanted to have kind of the weirder aliens following behind. And these designs were based vaguely on shapes that I associate with Sniad by Koosman, or there's the book Expedition to Darwin 4. I want to say by Wayne Barlow. I've got the book somewhere. But I mean, these are just vaguely shapes inspired by that. These aren't actually meant to be those creatures. This is a lot more whimsical than that. And so the next page will be an alien lion tamer with a 2-headed alien lion. Something we don't normally associate with St. Patrick's Day, but, it's an alien St. Patrick's Day, so who knows what they've got. Then after that, the next few pages will consist of dinosaurs, because, of course, aliens have dinosaurs. These dinosaurs may be slightly alien, but, that's just the way it goes. So I'm hoping I will finish the line art for this sketchbook in the next week or so, and eventually I'll have to paint it. There's a lot more work to do. But anyway, I will talk to you later next time. Goodbye.